minutes on my watch. That's 4. Goodness. You should mow down to get here.
So I didn't know how to track it.
Yep. No, thank you. It's my traditional fishing trip to Suez. No.
They're just like my dad. He just going hunting trips, never took his gun with him. It was all about the other stuff.
Well, we caught lots of fish. We just didn't catch one.
Yeah,
Let's put it that way. Walleye.
That you were catching
Panfish. Lots of panfish.
Did you?
We kept a few, but this was, oh, that's not the one. Hold on, I'll show you. Ian got a beauty of a perch.
That's so cute. But I mean,
12 and a half inches.
That's long for a
wow,
That's a big perch.
that's a big perch.
Yeah, it's real big.
I'm not sure, like, I have no knowledge, but I found that usually on your plate.
Yeah, it was a big perch.
Not all the knowledge base I have.
So I'm gonna have it entered in the Walleye Association contest, and I would venture to say you'll win for the first category.
Really?
Yeah, the world record is like 15 and a half inches, so.
Thank you for running over there here.
Oh, I didn't do anything, I was just
I
showing
know,
you.
but I knew you were ready, and I liked
Yeah.
it. So I was like, having to sit here with that same dog. We will go ahead and get the work session.
For the work session this evening, the main emphasis of it was for us to take a look at our local data measures as part of our data study and preparing for the teaching and learning plan for this coming year. So instructional leadership will come forward and present that. Then we do want to allow some time to the end of the work session for Mr. Scott and Dr. Shepard to talk a little bit about Elevate K-12 and the potential use for that this coming year based on projections that we're looking at currently. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Dr. Higginson and Dr. Shepard, and I'll join them to kind of take a look at our local data.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening, everyone.
Okay, we're just going to dive right in. Here we are with our local data. So this year in the elementary, we had 3 assessments that we administered to collect some local data. So we used our NWEA math roads, which we've been using for several years now, as well as NWEA checklists, and we'll get into that more specific into each measure. And then our benchmark data from our reading program for the first time. So this was year 1 for the staff.
At the middle school, you can see also that we had NWEA data, and for package data, that's assessment that we have been using. This is the only tool that we really have in secondary, not including, of course, iLearn and SAT when we get into high school. So that's why it becomes very imperative at the secondary level for us to start looking at the critical alignment of the end of course assessments and how they fit into the common formative assessments that will help along the way. We'll talk a little bit about that as we move on in the presentation.
Okay, so NWEA measures, you can see there, reading K through 8, nonfiction, literature, and vocabulary. And in math, number sense, computation, algebraic thinking, geometry, measurement, and data analysis. So those are the concepts that are measured in math roads. And overall, I'm going to show you, I have data broken down into charts. But first, I wanted to give you the overall takeaways, and then we'll dig deeper into the actual charts that have been provided. But overall, for kindergarten in reading, our achievement shows that 61% of our students are at or above grade level with reading achievement by the end of the year. And throughout all of our data, and you'll see this tonight, we saw the trend that our kindergarten students kind of seem to be leading the pack. So early on, and we have some hope with our reading program, they seem to be doing fairly well. It's as we move into the upper grades that we see the dips and the gaps in the slide. So in grades 1 through 6, on average, 44% of our students were at or above grade level with reading. And then in math, you can see there's 63% of students, this is at kindergarten again, for math achievement. And then we go to 43% of grades 1 through 6 with math achievement. So there's a big transition from 2nd to 3rd grade. Overall, we know that students in those early grades, K1 and 2, are learning to read, but in 3rd grade, we go into reading to learn. That's a big transition for students. The tests get harder, the questions get harder, the skills get harder, and we're seeing that in our data. So for middle school.
And in middle school, what happens is that reading becomes very critical in the content areas themselves. So it's not just a matter of English language arts, but it's a matter of literacy in all the content areas. And as you can see, there at the middle school level, 7th graders were at 43%, 8th graders were at 47% at or above grade level in reading. And then in math, interestingly, both 7th and 8th grade were at 40% or at above level.
All right, so to tell you a little bit about NWEA interpretation, because the next slide I'm going to show you on the chart, so I want you to be able to understand how to read those charts. So they're given in percentiles. So a percentile rank shows how well students performed in comparison to students in the same norm group. So a student's percentile rank indicates that the student scored as well or better than the percent of students in the norm group. So an example would be a student who scores at the 35th percentile is scoring as well or better than 35% of students in the norm group. But it's important to remember that also means that 65% of students scored better or exceeded the score. Sometimes this can be a little bit confusing for teachers because when a student is scoring at the 50th percentile, we sometimes think that means 50%. And 50% equates to a failing grade. But really, if the student is scoring in the 50th percentile, they're scoring at grade level. That's the mean or the average. And in NWEA, that's shown in a color band, which is yellow. I'm going to show that to you in a minute. So the simplest way to remember that is when you see students in those yellow bands and higher, they are scoring at or above grade level. That makes sense. Okay, so here's reading achievement broken down. This is where we got those percentages that I just shared with you for the overall takeaways. So you see there, again, kindergarten, you see some relatively higher scores, but then as you work down, that's where we see some gaps in there. And our goal really is we need to start moving the kids that are in the red and the orange band over to the yellow, to the green, and to the blue. And the more that we can move kids over, the better results that we get on NWEA. So those are the reading scores and how we came to those percentages. These are the math achievement scores, and it's kind of the same trend. A little bit higher in kindergarten, but then as we work our way down, we need to really start moving those kids. Take a look at the middle school.
And as you can see there in the middle school, once again, those that are in the red and orange, we need to be moving them over more into the yellow, green, and the blue. You can see pretty similar at the grade level.
Okay, so some highlights. So then when you go into NWEA and after you collect that full district data and you start to look at it by school, there are several reports in there that help you to break it down. So initially I shared with you the nonfiction, the literature, but you can dig deeper into NWEA. You can look at specific skill sectors, Phonemes, these reports, this is really helpful, because as we're having teams get together and collaborate, it's important for Riverview to share what's going on in first grade reading over at Riverview. What can we learn from what that team is doing that can perhaps help? What strategies are they using? You know, what is their focus there? So that was one highlight there that we saw. In Longer, same thing if you look at their kindergarten. They, by the end of the year, only had 3 students that were in red, but they had 28 students, which is 27% for both. If I were showing you, if I were in the NWEA system, you can toggle over these colors and it tells you the exact number of students. But they had 27% both go to green and to blue. So that's really good growth for them in kindergarten. And then if you take a look at their 4th grade, you can see that they made some really good progress in math. So I'm interested to talk to April and talk to the 4th grade team about what strategies are you using in math? What was your focus there? What did your CFAs look like? Because they've made some good progress there. I just wanted to point that out, that when you look at the individual reports, it really helps you to identify teams and see progress there, which is important for us.
So the second NWEA measure that's used as a primary grade is the NWEA checklist. And as we were trying to figure out a way to represent what was happening there, we experimented with some different things, and I kind of took the lead on this section. And so under kindergarten letter recognition, this should be no shocker, there are 52 questions that are asked of kindergartners to recognize upper and lowercase letters. And so what we do with that is that we go into our kind of spreadsheets that we have here, and we set up by a building, and we basically say, all right, at the beginning of the year, how many of our students can identify fewer than 40% of their letters? And then how many can identify between 40 and 80% of their letters, and how many can identify over 80% of their letters? So that gets us, similar to what Mindy just showed, the colored band, so that we know how many students are performing at that low range, that medium range, or that high range. And so what we do is we go through and we list each classroom, the number of students, how many are low, medium, and high per classroom, then we convert those to percentages. Then what we want to do, and this year because of staffing shortages and things, we didn't do the middle of the year assessment, but we wanted to make sure that we knew growth overall for the year, so we made sure to do the end of the year assessment. So in the end of the year assessment, we take those same classrooms of students and we do the same distribution as to how many at the end of the year identify fewer than 40, how many identify between 40 and 80% of their letters, and how many can do more than 80% of the 52. So as you can see in this group from Beardsley, by the time we got to the end of the year, we had 9 students who were low at the beginning of the year. Now there are only 2 that are in that category. Out of that whole class of kindergartners at Beardsley, we had 12 who were in the medium range, 6 that were in the medium range here. So between 21 in the low and medium here, we're now down to 8. And we moved from 26 who could identify 80% or more of their letters to 45 students who can identify 80% or more of their letters. So when we look at that converted to percentages, we see some high percentages here of those classrooms that make this. And when we come over here, we look at the percentage change growth. So we're making 30, 35% growth between the beginning of the year and the end of the year, and the percentage of students who move to high. And so that is done for every building across this spreadsheet. And then when we arrive at the very end, we do a summary sheet where we have the overall grade level at the beginning of the year and the percentage of those levels, and then what happens at the end of the year, what are the percentages at each of those levels, and then what's the percentage change. So when we go back to the slide deck and the information I provided here, when we look across the whole district, at the beginning of the year, our highest school had 94% of their students be able to identify 80% or more of their letters. And we had 2 other schools that were above 90%. By the end of the year, 2 of our schools were at 100% of their kindergartners identifying all their letters. We had 6 that were above 95% and 3 that were between 90 and 95. So we went from 3 schools above 90% at the beginning of the year to 11 that were above 90% by the end of the year. And some of those grade levels had 28 to 30% increases for a couple of our schools that had some of the lowest beginning of the year scores, they made some substantial growth by the end. That's where, when Mindy's talking about the optimism and what we see happening with our efforts in early literacy and phonics program, is that we're getting to the point where by the end of the year, if you look at the center bottom box, 95% of our students can identify 80% or more of their letters, leaving only about 3.5% to 4% in that medium range, and only 1% of our students in low. So the question begins with, if that is the end of the year proficiency that we're seeing with students in this, then what does that mean and carry over into first grade? So overall as a district, on the letter recognition piece, our average of the district across all of our students was an 83%, 84% at the beginning of the year, finished at 95, so we think about 11% increase across the district in kindergartners' ability to recognize at least 80% of their letters. The district low at the beginning of the year was a 55.32 at one of our schools, but by the end of the year, that school got to 85% of their students knowing their letters. So that was a substantial increase for them. This next slide is phonemes. So phonemes are initial and ending consonant sounds and middle vowel sounds, so the sounds that our letters make, building blocks of literacy. So in grade 1, again, same kind of breakdown. Do they know 80% or more of those sounds out of the 44 questions that they had? How many of them were in the medium range and how many were in the high range? So at the beginning of the year, we had 26.4% of our students at one of our buildings as the district high. So only a fourth of the students at our best school, in terms of phonemic awareness here, was that. We have to keep in mind that first grade are the students who had hybrid, abnormal kindergarten year, did not have the solid instruction of the kind that we saw happening with our kindergartners this year. So we know that that's what's contributing to those gaps. By the end of the year, one of our schools had arrived at a 78%, 79% end of year as the high for that. And so the percent change that we saw in that school was 58% between the beginning of the year and the end of the year. And there were 4 other schools that made increases in the 22 to 27% range. So again, as Mindy suggested regarding looking at the data, as we look at those charts in more detail, when we notice individual classrooms or grade levels at individual schools, where are we getting these kind of results? And what's happening instructionally those places? Are there things unique going on with those classrooms or that mixture of students? Those can become a way for us to look at instructional practice and finding those pockets of excellence that can then spread across the district. As you see here, district low, we had one building that was a 1.39% at the beginning of the year, grew to 9.9, and there were about 3 schools that only made a 5 to 8% increase in their awareness of these sounds. And as a district, our overall percentage, and again, this is low, and we understand this is low and know why it's low, is that it's 14.65 that went to 32% with about 70 and 18% change. So this is part of the reason why a solid foundational program like we're doing with foundations and the work that's being done there is so critical for this word study, so that we can try to fill in these gaps and get this so that they're ready for what happens when we look at grade 2.
I just want to clarify something on this. I understand this chart. So for the district high, you've got 26.4, so that was one building. So are you saying that that building at the end of the year was at 40%?
Right. So what I'm trying to provide there is for that particular school, they were the district high, and then at the end of the year they got their students to 40%.
Okay, and so then the 78.57 could be a different building.
It's a different building, right?
And then they started at 20%.
And that's why I'm providing that,
Okay.
so you can see that the move that building made.
Gotcha. Okay, just wanted that clarification.
So I'm giving you a snapshot of the range that at the beginning of the year we had one school as low as 26.4, or excuse me, one as low as 1.39, one as high as 26.4. At the end of the year, we went from 9% to 78%.
Okay, thank you.
And then just to provide the context, that's what the brackets
Okay.
are doing.
Yep. Thanks.
So second grade, we administered 2 checklists here. One is a syllable type test, where we're looking at do students understand the combination of consonant, vowel, consonants? So that's usually a short vowel sound. And then a consonant vowel consonant with a silent E, a K to CBCE, so that would often be a long vowel sound. And then R-controlled vowels, where we have a vowel combined with an R, and it basically just ends up as an sound, but students need to understand that, like in the word doctor. So again, when we look at this, beginning of the year, 72% was our district high, and they got to 85.92%, which also is the district high by the end of the year. And there were 3 more schools above 75%, and 2 schools had an increase of 35 to 36%. For our district low, the beginning of the year was 23.4, end of the year, the lowest school was 43.9, which had increased about 8 percentage points, and that was one of the lowest in the district. Overall, as a district, again, you're seeing numbers that are substantially higher than first grade, with 51.07 as the beginning of the year district overall average got to nearly 70%, so we had 18.37% growth change there between the beginning of the year and the end of the year. And the final piece here are blends and digraphs, and so here students answer questions with initial and final blends, so combinations like a BL sound or an STR sound or ND or NT at the end of words, and then combinations of letters that create new sounds, like PH gives us an F sound, sh, those kind of things. So in here, again, we're seeing percentages higher than we had seen at first grade, and this provides us the ability to look at what's happening across these blends and digraphs. And so again, beginning of the year district high, 63.34, and that school got to 74.65, which also ended up being the high at the end of the year. A couple of our schools had 17 to 19% increases as the highs. District low was at 18.75 at the beginning of the year, and that building actually went down 5 percentage points. So that again is something that we go back to that principle and say, what's going on with your second grade? Mobility, questions of what you're doing in the classroom instructionally, questions of transiency, any of those kinds of questions. And so that gives us something that we have to dig in and look at. And then as a district, we saw almost 12% increase between beginning of the year and end of the year in terms of identifying those blends or diagrams. So this data then helps us look at and triangulate some with the status assessment that Mindy will talk about in a moment, but it also gives us a really good idea and a good benchmark starting year to know where our students are as we've returned to normal school and gotten back to this year and the first year instructionally with our foundation phonics program.
Okay, so moving on to status, this is assessment that is connected to our district reading program. I think in the past we've shared this with you before. It provides the reading program provides a benchmark tool assessment 3 times a year. It's aligned to the Indiana academic standards. This assessment provides rigor. It's a hard test. It's not easy, especially for our students in the higher grades. It is similar to the iLearn format. It requires stamina that students will have to display on iLearn. And so by providing the rigor early, the hope is that students will get the experience of taking an assessment like this, experiencing those question types so that they're ready by the time that they get to testing as opposed to waiting to the end and they've never experienced those types of questions.
Additionally, not only does it help students get used to the type of rigor that is going to be on those tests, but it helps teachers understand the type of rigor they have to do in the classroom, to which level of instruction they have to take their students so they are prepared for those moments. Because they all meet then what that expectation is on that standard.
So as we move to this data, and I'll show you the chart in just a minute, as Dr. Tolheimer expressed, we are seeing encouragement from the early grades with the data that the phonics program is giving us, and it's having a positive impact on student learning, so that's good. The data supports that the professional learning that we've provided with Christina Second has also been helpful. Some of the standards that she has emphasized and stressed, that we're seeing that in our data. Some areas of growth for For me, probably the biggest takeaway from this entire assessment was the writing. I think that we really need to focus on writing as we move forward, especially when our students practice responding to questions in writing. So it's not just writing the essays, because that is important, but also how do we respond to reading passages. It was interesting in the lower grades that students struggled with answering questions about main ideas and key details. So, kind of my takeaway on that is that we are really focusing on phonics, and so some of those questions that went a little deeper with the standards, we struggled a little bit with. So we'll see that in the data. And in the upper grades, you're going to see that our teachers, there are so many standards, and we just need to make sure that we're really focused on the most essential standards. So I'll show you that in the chart. Here is our writing proficiency, kindergarten down to 5th grade. As you can see that in kindergarten, we start at 74%, and then as we move along, very similar to some of our other data, by the time we get into 5th grade, they have to do a persuasive writing. It's at 48%. In our reading program, the 6th graders had to do a performance task. It's a little different. It's scored a little differently than it is in K through 5. So I couldn't kind of score up there for 6th grade because it's just reported differently. But that's K through 5, an indicator of where we're at with writing. In kindergarten, this is the encouraging data with regard to the early phonics. So you can see all of the standards listed there, the concepts, and we're scoring in the 80% range there. All of our schools, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, had an increase, most of them in double digits. So that's really encouraging news. I'm happy to see that, because we really worked hard on that phonics piece.
So just to back up, the connection here would be is noticing that those standards over there deal with letter sounds. What will be the carryover for this into beginning of year next year for 1st grade when they do the NAACP checklist? So if we've arrived at this point by the end of kindergarten through the instruction that's happened, what of that will persist through the summer slide, and how much higher might those BOY scores on the NAACP checklist be regarding letter sounds? So that's something we'll be watching.
In 1st grade, standards above 60% mastery, you can see there, a focus on phonics in those first two. And the second two, settings and characters, so that's more literature, those kinds of questions. In grade 2, overall story structure at 82%, story structure and conclusion 81%, and then phonics at 82%. So then when we move into 3rd grade, this is where that shift occurs. And this is what we're seeing in this data. So here, the standards where students were doing relatively well, above 60%, were all related to phonics. The standards at the bottom, and you'll notice that some are tagged in green and some are tagged in blue. So the IDOE provides us a test blueprint. And we can look through that blueprint and we can see the percentage that a standard is going to be covered on IR. And they're coded by number. So if it's a 9, that means this is an essential standard. Your students are definitely going to see this on the IR test. It may be in a few questions. A blue standard is coded in 12, and that means this is absolutely, without a doubt, going to be covered on iLearn, and your students are probably going to see this throughout the test. So we know ahead of time that these are the standards that are going to be tested. And so in 3rd grade, you can see where the students are struggling to make that shift between the phonics to the deeper level standards, to comprehension. And so this is where we need to really support our teachers and help with this shift. It's interesting because in grade 2, with overall story structure, our students scored 82%, but then when they get to 3rd grade and it's parts of the story, so those are related, we're down to 20%. So what happened there? And we go back, we look at question types. I did a presentation with the principals back in January to go through the test and look at particular question types and depth of knowledge, and have teachers go back and look at the CFAs that they're administering and their unit planning and things. Is the rigor there, and is it aligned? all the inferences and point of view, because those are difficult standards. But then at the bottom, on those other blue standards, you know, we've got some struggle there. But paraphrasing and summarizing, we're at 59%. That's a standard. I know that Christina's not going to part of our teachers, so you look at that and think, okay, that professional development is paying off for us there, but we need to make sure that we're emphasizing all of those standards and focusing in the right places. Kind of a common trend here in grade 5. You can see that where we're scoring well is with grammar and usage, and where they're struggling, and where we need to really focus is on those deeper depth of knowledge type standards. So some reflective questions that we will ask and continue to talk about: how much time is spent to focus on the most essential standards? What depth of knowledge or rigor are they being taught and assessed? And again, going back to writing, I think if we can really focus on writing, we can use them to prepare work. In grade 6, the scores, they actually are much better, and you kind of start to see a turnaround in grade 6 a little bit. Tracing and evaluating the argument was at 79%. I'm happy to see that. We really need to work on citing evidence and focusing on central idea in some way. So some highlights here. This is grade 3. So Monger, Riverview, and Roosevelt have some really good growth in grade 3. Monger had a 19%, Riverview 11%, and Roosevelt 23%. So thought it was a good shout out to recognize that they had some good growth in those grade levels.
And this is just overall, an overall grade level, not a specific standard.
Right, this is just the overall of the whole entire.
The whole entire, okay.
Mm-hmm. Their overall. And here in grade 4, we have Beardsley, Caesar, Monger, Riverview, and Woodland that demonstrated some significant growth. So next step, for grade 3, we are definitely going to move forward with foundations in grade 3. We did not have foundations this year because I think we need to fill in some of the gaps with reading and phonics, so that we can move into more complex skills. We can help them fill in those gaps with the 3rd grade students that need help in reading. We can move them to those deeper complex skills. All of our principals will continue to work with TLC coach. Each principal is assigned to a TLC coach. We are going to have some intentional training next year with math. This year our teachers had an initial launch training with foundations, and then they had 6 follow-up targeted sessions with foundations. So this year we're going to do the same with math. We're going to turn our sights on math and really hone in there. They had the initial trainings last year in math, but again, in recognition that you have to really balance the training that you're providing to teachers. So this year we hope to move in the math direction. We also are going to continue to provide training for teachers for NWEA and Sabbath. Ricky Myers and I did 3 sessions at the DOT conference, and we had really good feedback. I included it at the end of the presentation for teachers to really dig into these reports, to look at their data, to ask those reflective questions, and to help them as they're planning, and if they're creating their own PFAs. We're going to continue training to try to marry the science into the other content areas. I think if we can science into the benefit for us, and again, a focus on writing.
At the secondary level, our next steps, as you can see there, also include the continued work with the PLC coaches. We had a first-year middle school principal this year. We had, we're having another new principal coming year. So this is going to be critical. All 3 of the principals this year raved about how much they grew in the PLC process. That's the fact that they had a coach that came in and worked with them, not only individually, but also in small groups. Secondly, we're going to put a stronger emphasis on literacy across the content area. Because when you one would naturally think if it's English language arts, that's the job of the English teacher. Well, no, literacy becomes a responsibility of every secondary teacher. Because we all know literacy is the thread that we develop across the curriculum. How can an English teacher teach the science of reading and physics, for example? Well, it takes a physics teacher to know how a physics teacher reads and writes. That subject area, and that's true across the entire curriculum. So we have to put more of a concentration on literacy across the content areas next year. Also, we're going to provide NWEA training for our 7th and 8th grade teachers, and we're also talking about targeting some 9th grade teachers to be included in that NWEA training as well. Even though we end NWEA testing after 8th grade, remember those 8th graders in August are going to be moving into the freshman division, and they have just taken that spring assessment, and that will yield some valuable data to the freshman teachers about what they need to do as next steps. So if we can get them trained in interpreting that data as well, that's going to go a long way in their planning and then the implementation plan. Another thing we have to work on at the secondary level is the refinement of the essential standards. We did a really good job this year at getting essential standards identified. However, there are some specific courses. I'm not going to say content areas because it's really specific here, but there are some specific courses where in the process, the teachers have decided that all of the standards are essential. Well, in a sense, maybe that's kind of true, because why would they be standards by the state if they're not important? But we also know there are some that are more essential than others, and they are the ones that are the enduring ones. They are the ones that are necessary for students to reach the next level of learning. They are the ones that, well, let's say it this way, they're going to show up on the exam. So those are the essential ones. So we need to do some refinement there, because in our secondary schools, since we don't have a Savas benchmark and we don't have a checklist assessment like we do in K through 2, how are we going to measure how students are doing along the way? We cannot wait to I-learn, and we cannot wait till they take the SAT. Because, well, the analogy that I talked to Dr. Higginson about is that going to your physician, right? If you want to know what's wrong with you, you don't wait till the autopsy, because it's too late to do anything about it. The I-learn, the SAT, are the autopsy. It's too late. It's at the end. What we can do when we go to the doctor on a regular basis is figure out, well, Dr. Shepard, you need to eat less and exercise more, right? That will give you a few more years. That will take some of your care of your other health issues. That's what those benchmark assessments are doing for us right now. They're telling us this is what we're going to have to do if we're going to get the change, so that at the end, we'll know why we got the results at the very end. And so that is why it's so important for us to work on those essential standards, because what we have to do is take those end of course assessments that all courses have right now, whether it's a semester-long class, whether it's a year-long class, they have that end of course assessment. And what we want them to do is to start from there and break those down into smaller benchmarks that they can take along the way, and make sure that those are adequately aligned to those standards that are the critical standards. So if we don't go through that refinement process, we're not going to be able to get them there. Well, that is going to be a big piece of the work that we're going to have to undertake to do that.
So what's the timetable for that?
During the course of the year, we have to work on that, with the emphasis on creation of those assessments, the common assessments this year.
But wouldn't that be done like in the summer so that you could hit the ground running?
Well, it's, yes, and we do have some teams that are working this summer, as a matter of fact. But there are others who we still have to work with, and that is what they will do critical that all the members of the CLC team are participating in this process. So we have to do it when we have the availability, well, to have all of the members.
So can you turn your mic around?
Oh,
So that,
And it's not, yeah.
please and thank you.
And I
I
completely.
can, but they may not be able to hear me.
Well, I'm sure they could hear me.
And I completely understand your question and the critical piece of getting there.
Well, one of the other things is Dr. Higginson mentioned that, well, we're gonna go over to Riverview and find out what they're doing.
Right.
Well, we should have been there and found out what they're doing and started saying, okay, this is gonna work elsewhere and stuff like that. So that seems like we're always behind the 8 ball in that regard. And then the other thing is like, what are the state benchmarks for the entire state of Indiana regarding this type of data? How do we compare it? And 2, how do we compare to other urban schools like us? Okay, because it may not be fair to compare us to everybody in the state, but definitely we should be able to compare ourselves to other urban schools. Do we have that kind of comparison?
The data that we would have would be, at the middle school, we would have iLearn data, which is really the measure we have. If districts are using other types of assessments, if they decide to post that, then we would be able to find it, but if they don't, we wouldn't be able to find that. If we, don't post our NWEA data on our website, assessment for the whole state to see how we did on that.
Oh, so the state doesn't require
No.
that to be reported?
No. And then for SAT data, of course, whoever takes the SAT, if you, well, we kind of get reports of combination.
But wouldn't the NWEA give you data like
Yeah.
like you say, okay, there's 10 urban schools that are like Elkhart
Well,
as a conglomerate,
it doesn't break it down that way. We don't have, it's a national reporting. It's just how, whoever across the nation has given that assessment, is what, that's how we get those norms.
And so where I was going with this was going forward, okay, what are our goals, set as benchmarks? What are our goals to say, okay, now we see these numbers. What numbers do we want to see at the beginning of this year? Okay, what numbers do we want to see at the end of this coming school year? And I don't see those in here.
Those will be included in the teaching and learning plan that you'll get a draft of over the next couple of weeks.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Then over on the right, well, that's what I was talking about, the creation of common formative assessments, CFAs as we commonly call them, to align with the already established and or revised common formative assessments that need to be worked on. So those are the steps that we're going to be taking.
Okay, and the last 2 slides, and you can read these on your own, are just the training that we provided already at our Tier 1 symposium, the DOT conference on NWEA and Sabbath. So we had some really good feedback, which tells us that that teachers learned quite a bit from looking at those reports, appreciated having the time to collaborate with their teams. And so in our teaching and learning plans that we will lay out for you, we've got plans on the e-learning days to get those teams together to do more collaboration, to really learn from each other. So, hope that will continue to help.
Something that Dr. Higginson had said about the kindergarten and how optimistic you were, which is good. Well, that is the first group of kids in the recent history that haven't experienced, the effects of COVID inside of a school setting and stuff like that. So I think it behooves us as a board and also as a community out here is that we cannot ever afford to shut these schools down. That is pure poison to these kids out here and stuff like that. That is just going forward an unacceptable answer to we're going to close our schools because we'll never ever catch these kids up. And I think that's a lesson learned. We're starting to see the recovery of that with kindergarten and stuff like that. So so going forward, you know exactly what my position is going to be about school closures. So.
One of the interesting things about the data that we have is that coming back to a more normal kind of school year this year is like a job, because we know 1 year data really doesn't tell the story early, but we need some trends. And so over a 2 or 3 year period, then we can start seeing, okay, these are the more consistent pockets of where we've seen things that are already happening well. This is really good data right now. It's telling us, it's making our ears and our eyes perk up quite a bit about, you know, what are some spots for us to maybe take notice of as positive hotspots, but also it's helping us raise our eyebrows about some potential risks that we mentioned as well. And then as that trend data continues over the years, that's going to just help us refine that even more. So, thank you. That just goes right along with what you said about being here.
Yeah, it demonstrates the value of a teacher over and over.
Definitely.
Question, as I'm looking at, the reading achievement data, what specifically, are we doing for the kids who are in the first to the 40th percentile, to catch them up? What kinds of things are in the works, program planning, whether it's tier 2, tier 3, or other tutoring after school, whatever, because these,
Right.
wow.
Well, one of the first thing we need to do is find out who are those kids. Are they kids who are not coming to school? Are they English language learners? Are they special education students? Is it the class as a whole in general? So, because that determines what the intervention is going to be, determining on, you know, what is it that the need is? Why are they lacking in the area that we know that they're lacking? And then our peers under the ECS system are really how we then address each of those needs. You know, is it a matter of bringing in some specialists into the classroom to assist the teacher? Is it a matter of the teacher giving a little more one-on-one attention? Is it a matter of moving up to tier 1, 2, and tier 3 interventions that would folks figure out?
Well, and I would even suggest too, the parents. I mean, I think,
Oh, definitely.
you know, I think at some point, you know, I think we've all discussed or, you know, had conversations, I know just me as a parent, that, you know, we need the parents to have a role too, to help them learn how to help their child. I know that I was grateful that I had a teacher when one of my kids was struggling to say, what do I do? How do I do it? Help me. And to be able to bridge those gaps. So I think being able to have those conversations and communication with parents to say, we need your help and we're going to help you help your child is extremely important as well.
Let me respond, like, from a principal perspective, from a principal perspective, I treated this all very individualized, one by one, student by student. So on those MTSS, and I know we talk about that a lot, but just practically from a principal standpoint, when scores like this come in, the first thing as a building leader that you do is you target these reports, you go in and you look individually, student by student, where they are at. The checklists are so valuable because this is generalized data, nonfiction, literature, vocabulary. Now I have to dig deeper to know exactly what is that student's deficiency. Where are they struggling? So when I go into a checklist and I administer the checklist to that student, I can hone in and I can pull a report and say, they're struggling with initial sounds. They know these initial sounds, but they don't know this, and this. So now as a teacher, when I'm pulling my guided reading group, and I have those students individually sitting in front of me, and I create my lesson plan, I know that with Johnny, with Susie, and with Bobby, I'm working on these 3 sounds. And I have to do that for a certain period of time, and then I have to reassess them, so it may be just a quick, another checklist. I mean, it's not like hours of assessing, but I need to do a check to make sure now they have those sounds, so that I can move on to the next skill, or the next sound, or whatever it is. but it's so diagnostic. And then at those MTSS meetings, it's critical that we're tracking that data, and that when teachers come to those meetings, then they can show, hey, I worked on these 3 sounds, now we're moving here, now we're moving here, now we're moving here. And you're right, inviting a parent to attend those meetings and be present, so that then at home, you can say, here are some resources that you can use to work at home. I mean, it's all of that put together, but that's really how you do it. It's individual, student by student. And it's hard work because sometimes kids who try different resources and you try different strategies and this isn't working, so now you pull this out, now you pull this program out. And sometimes things just aren't working, so then you say, okay, do we need to look further now? Is there something else there that we need to go further? Or do you find whatever it is that's going to work? And sometimes that happens too, but you have to know your kids and you have to know where they're struggling.
And what Dr. Higginson just spoke to is really the essence and the heart of the work of TSC. Both grade level teams, both content area teams, they get together and they look at those kids one by one, and everything that she described, they bring together. And that's the essence of it. And when the team says, we need more help beyond this, that's when we bring in other professionals, and some of those other professionals serve on those.
Mindy. Go ahead.
So then, the way you describe it as a principal, that's the test scores are here. That's what our principals are doing right now, is they're breaking these down individually, assigning students and
Our
marking.
physical folks have been doing this all along. I mean, this is just us presenting.
Okay,
Tonight,
but since the scores came in, they've been doing that now.
Absolutely. They can get
Every
this
time there's a
data,
benchmark assessment, they look at it, and they digest it.
they can get these reports the day that a student, on NWEA, when students take the assessment, those results are immediate. For those checklists, you can get that, you can get those test scores pretty immediate, go there and be able to pull off the report. So the beauty of the checklist is, you can give them over and over and over again to be able to continue to assess the students are and where they're moving along. What we need to do is help our teachers understand how to use that tool. So when Ricky and I presented to the teachers and said, let's go in and look at these checklists and how to use them. Sometimes when we say, okay, we're gonna go ahead and you have to do an assessment, sometimes the teacher doesn't understand the value of why they have to do it or what that will do for them. So our goal is to get out and say, don't look at this as just an assessment that the district is making you do. Look at this as a tool to be able to use in your classroom to progress monitor. The NWEA checklists weren't designed the checklists themselves were designed as a progress monitoring assessment. So that's the way that they should be used. So we can help our teachers to understand that. Now, granted, and you guys here at WU too, they have a lot on their plate. So we have to help them to know how to build it in where it doesn't feel like it's just one more thing.
The checklist of the new, or is it existed for a while?
Well, it was tied, at first we used it as part of our dyslexia screener. So when the state mandated that we do dyslexia testing, the NWEA was, one of the approved dyslexia assessments. So
And we already had NWEA, so.
right, so we used the checklist as part of that. But as we have learned and delved into that tool, we've learned that, hey, for dyslexia is absolutely useful, but this is useful for any student and being able to track and monitor how they're doing. If these could serve as, and we've talked a lot about it on instructional leadership, these could serve as CFAs. This could be your CFA. You don't have to do an additional CFA in addition to a checklist. But we need to do a better job of helping our teachers understand how to use them. And so that's the goal, is to get out and to be able to help with that.
So what percentage of principals do you feel like are really buying into this? And then what type of, I know that you're saying we need to do this. There's only so many of you. Are there coaches designed to help a principal help their teachers? Because it really comes down to this chain of command, it seems to me. I'm kind of like that chain of command girl, and I'm looking at, okay, how does this all come out in the wash?
It's everybody's responsibility. So Cheyenne Media, one of then at the team meetings, as the principals talk through the NWEA data, that just helps familiarize teachers more with how to use the tool. So that's part of it. And sometimes it just takes time to help grow teachers' knowledge. We have content specialists now that I think certainly as we move forward, we just finished our first year with specialists. If they grow their knowledge and familiarity with this, they can help us to help their colleagues and help their peers. So it's a collective. I think a large majority of our principals, well, all of them are familiar with NWEA because we've been using it. The checklist piece has been new over the last 2 years, I would say. Last year for dyslexia, or the year before for dyslexia. But this year was the first year that we required it outside of dyslexia to really hone into, to collect this type of data. So the checklist piece, well, they're being familiarized with it now that we've gone through it for a year.
So sometimes I feel like what I hear from principals, some principals, not all, is that they're afraid to put one more thing on their teachers because they feel like they need to keep and retain their teachers in their building and not have them overwhelmed. And so many, what you hear from the teachers then is that they're doing so many assessments to see where their students are that they don't get to actually teach in the classroom. So, I don't know where there is it feels like we're chasing our tails a little bit, but it also sounds like we really need to have everybody on board, on the same page. And those people who are dragging their feet or those principals who are not as strong, make sure that we're putting strong people around them to help their teachers or help those, make those principals that can't do it, available to the industry.
There's always a balance between when you do a new assessment or you put something out there. It is true, teachers have so much on their plate. We all know that. You've been out in the buildings and you've seen it. So we're always trying to balance. How do we know this is important. We know we need to collect data. We know this is only going to help our students, but how then do we balance it with the other side of it? It's a constant balance.
Because the question that has to be answered after they look at that data and they analyze it is, what do we do?
Now what?
So that really then gets into the work of teaching. So, so that's, it's the one thing that, this is so important to be able to look at that data, analyze that data, to understand what the needs are. But then the next step is one that has to be taken care of. So it is a huge case.
Yeah. It seems as though the ones that have been very good at analyzing data early seem to have some big improvements throughout the year. That's what I have noticed. So we just have to make sure that those other principals and folks are understanding that important. I think it's going to be a great effort, and I think that you have narrowed it down, which I love. And I think now you really know what we have to do to push that forward. And it's a big task, you guys, and I appreciate all the things that you brought here to us to help us understand it better, because I certainly understand it better after today. Thank you.
So if understanding the data, being able to utilize this checklist and helping teachers balance out the time to fit this in, what a better approach would be to put a structured process in place where everybody is getting the same type of support to get everybody to the same level of proficiency.
So I think when we present, I think our next step is to present our teaching and learning plan, which we've laid out now what our next steps are. So I think that question may be answered, laying out what our plan is for the professional development for next year, how we're going to plan with the learning days, our plans with the principals. So that is to come. But yes, I think everybody needs to hear the same message. Because otherwise, we're all over the place here. We can't be too critical.
And the importance of being able to interpret these test results, assessment results, knowing how to be a good reading teacher takes some time. It's something you develop as a craft. And if we have a lot of staff turnover, it becomes difficult to build that bench depth of people who have that understanding of literacy. Because to understand the different theories and balance that out, what works and what doesn't work, And it's not something that necessarily a first-year teacher is going to be able to do. And how do you interpret those test results? I mean, it's something that builds over some time. So one of the struggles that we face is how do we do that? And to some extent, there are teachers that get this and have it and are very good and do great things instructionally, as we'll kind of see in a moment. But then we have the new people that we need to bring on board. So we're always having to balance that as well, because a grade level may have lots of veteran people at it and they're good to go. Another grade level, everybody there may be new when we have to do that work and support there. So that's part of our work as well, as to how to keep that going as we do that.
What I would love to see in this plan is more accountability. I can't remember what the 4 questions are for the PLC. What happens if people are already good at it, which it sounds like some people are? What happens when people are not good at it? And then what happens when people just don't want to do it? What is the accountability? You have a plan, but I feel like a lot of the implementation, there is an accountability to either help people who are struggling or to correct people who just don't want to get on board. So where is the, I know you don't answer it, but I'm just saying, that's what I want to look for in this plan, is how do you balance that out, and where does accountability? And not just for the teachers who should be implemented, but for the people who should be helping the teachers implement accountability on all sides.
Yes,
All right, thank you.
lot of work.
Thank you. Yep.
Appreciate that.
Closely related to what we just talked about is, what Kevin and I wanted to talk to you about for a couple of minutes. The company K-12 Elevate. You remember we used them last year to fill in some of the gaps. And classroom teachers to provide the instruction that was needed at secondary level. So we have conducted surveys of all secondary programs to determine what it's looking like in terms of being able to fill classroom teachers with certified teachers who can provide instruction that we're talking about. And right now, it looks like the high school, senior high school, and freshman division can cover it with the current staff. Some of them may have to have overload like they did last year, but they don't think we need any additional outside help. Middle school's a different story. In doing the survey, we anticipate somewhere around being short teachers for 100 sections of courses, which translates, to about 18 full-time teachers. So Kevin and I have been in conversation with K-12 Elevate again, and they are offering us a contract and to work with them again, where we would actually have those certified teachers who would teach from a remote location, that it would be a synchronous experience, meaning it's a live experience, meaning, again, though, that we would have to have a proctor or what they call a coach in the classroom to make sure all the equipment's turned on and to monitor while they're going through the learning. And so we just wanted to share that with you this evening, that we want to enter that contract with you. As you know, we would bring it to you in a regular board meeting a couple of weeks from now, but they're going to raise their prices at the end of this week. And so if they would let us on the dotted line, which we want to do, then it would say that their markup's going to be about 70%. Already pretty big bill, significant.
This many sections is quite a few more sections than we used last year. So 100 sections, 100 classroom periods, it's going to be in the neighborhood of $550,000. So by committing this week, and we'll bring the contract to you, we'll avoid that 7% increase. So over the course of the year, it's going to save us roughly $70,000. They did concede on pricing for classes that will run both semesters, which is also saving us money. They did agree to that piece, but they're holding firm on the timeline. So we just want to share that with you and answer answer any questions you might have. Number of course sections across the 3 middle schools. Northside 36, up here Moran 40, and 24 at Woodside. And that is based on the staffing we have today. So if we use more teachers, it may grow. But we've had those discussions with.
How many students do we have between all 3 schools? And at that point, is that something that we consider with the RFP of merging our middle schools together? That's one question. 2, why did Christy Stepman want Elevate out of the school? Yeah, why did she want it out of the school? That's 2. 3, do we have data on how many students did not show up to those Elevate classes? And do we have data on how many people we actually had watching the students? Because that was, you know, many parents, teachers, staff across the school system said that there was nobody in those classrooms watching the kids. Half of those kids never showed up to those classes because they thought it was pointless. We had a middle school principal wanted out of her school system, and the RFP is huge for me. Is that,
What were the results?
yeah,
That we have,
what were our results?
what kind of our results for the kids who were in those classes? Do we have that information?
But we can implement it.
Yeah, because that's huge. I mean, before we load a contract up with that, do we consider what we have to do to really make sure that we have a live teacher who's invested in our school system with our students?
Another quick thing, with the technology that we have, and the cameras and all that, is it possible, for example, a teacher at Northside who's teaching algebra, and we need somebody at Pierre Morant, is it possible for them to do that internally and have our own teachers
We had that discussion.
do that
in a setting
and
this
have
afternoon.
something set up that can maybe accommodate?
We had a
some of
conversation
those.
about that this afternoon. A couple concerns that came up were, is this something that teachers who feel comfortable and capable to do that volunteer and do, and we try to fill that as much as possible? Or is that a right of assignment where we're forcing people who may not be comfortable doing that to do it?
Okay.
And we would lean towards potentially seeking out volunteers who would be willing to do that. And for taking on those additional students, they'd be potentially getting paid overages and that kind of thing.
Right.
But that was really the big concern that came up of, like, is this truly a right of assignment thing and people are going to be forced to do this? Or is this where we would take volunteers and take the ability to do it as much as we can and then come back and backfill
Right.
another way as we might need to?
How would they fit that in with their normal schedule?
So like if I were teaching, and then you either had a room set up at another school or within the same school, you could have another classroom set up with, here again though, you would still need a coach, a proctor, a para, somebody in that room, which if we have had difficulty getting that for Elevate, we may have that difficulty getting it for our own teacher doing it. So I would be in this classroom teaching my 20-some kids, and then it would be live streamed into another room or into another school, into another room, where those students would be there with supervision by a proctor or somebody there.
So it'll be at the same time they normally teach,
Right.
not at a separate time.
Right. Well, and we'd have that problem anyways, because if we didn't have a person that could supervise, we clearly can't have the Elevate class, so.
Right, so it's the same situation. And we've discussed, I mean, obviously, if we're gonna be spending the money, we would rather pay our own teachers
Yeah.
to do our overage and all of that. It's just how many people would be willing to do that, and is that gonna, how many of these sections does that help solve?
The severity of the staffing issue kind of puts us in the rock and hard.
What kind of?
And we did hear, some positives about Elevate and some concerns. That's where the threat is. It's kind of dependent on how effective that person was teaching, how that came across.
So can somebody give context to what were some of the technical issues? Why do we have a hard time getting people? And what were the other issues? I just want to understand the context of that.
In terms of technical, there, at the beginning, there was an issue of, connecting with a live teacher.
because of their technology and programming
I
or
don't know,
because
it's
of ours?
probably a little bit of both, maybe some things on our end, maybe some things on their end, but they smooth that out quite quickly in the process. So that part was okay. One of the difficulties we had was getting proctors into classrooms. Many of them feeling, not strong enough in the technology area to do what they need to do. But really, once they got to it, it's really just treating them.
So who were you using as the proctors, and what did they
Who we
need to
could
do
hire,
with technology?
like paras that we could hire.
What did they have to do with technology? There.
Well, it's a matter of turning the equipment on to get the classroom started because it is a live feed.
So it's not anything super complicated, I guess, is what I'm trying to understand.
Right. It's not anything.
We have a training for proctors,
Yes.
so they would have them.
And that was one of the problems, by the way, that you mentioned that in the early days, that, the training wasn't exactly what we expected from them, so we had a meeting with them immediately to change that around, and the training turned out to be exactly what promised. First was not putting that.
So how much, if any, input or expectations can we give to those people? Because I teach all my classes virtually and also train other educators to do virtual, and it's different how you engage on the virtual through Zoom. But if they are teaching for us, we set expectations for them as far as things. So do we have that leeway to set some expectations for how they engage the students at all, or if any? Because that might help with some of, like, everybody doesn't translate well over a virtual setting, but with certain guidelines or expectations, they are able to engage students better and bring forth the curriculum better. So how much leeway do we have with that?
Well, I don't know how much leeway we have in saying who they can hire. But
No, not who they can hire, but how they facilitate some of the strategies they use. Like, for instance, if it's a 90-minute class,
I think the best that
maybe.
we do, the best that we do is, because of concerns when we're hearing those kinds of things to them, that, the teacher's not still engaging and the students are not participating, and so this is what we want to do. That's the best that we can do. We can say we don't want a teacher with them. Yeah, so we can do that.
That's kind of,
That's not exactly what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you say, if this is, let me finish on this. If it's a 90-minute class, you can say, maybe have them do a interactive activity, or do certain things during that 90 minutes,
Right.
not specifically pick the teacher for them, but ask them to add certain strategies in. I think we should have the leeway to do that, and if you're not sure, you should ask, because that could solve some of the problems.
I'm gonna write down the kind of questions I had, because these are like important things. Why West Side chose to remove Elevate? How many classrooms were we lacking people that were able to supervise our children? What the attendance was for the Elevate classroom? Those are things that are really important, and what the data was of what our children received from the Elevate classroom versus our in-person teaching staff. And with a 2-week leeway, how do you reach out to our staff to ask them if this is something that they would be interested to do, and how do we negotiate what the stipend would be if a teacher picks up another classroom? Because I don't want to put all of our eggs in the basket of Elevate when we had one full school pull that whole programming out, and we were never sure why. And if we're not educating our children on what risk do we have, that if we have children, and we know that 7th and 8th grade is such a gap time, the maturity level, that what we have between 6th and 7th grade, where they go to 8th and 9th. If we have parents that have their children in more than one classroom that's virtual, what is the risk that we have that they remove them from our school system and put them somewhere where there's live teachers? Now we're losing more families and more opportunity for our school system to grow at the risk of a max headroom classroom.
I'll look through those questions.
Yeah, thank you.
What subject areas are the primary subject areas?
Math and language arts.
Math, language, or,
There's
some
social
science,
studies,
and some
science.
social studies.
So our core classroom, you know, when, yeah,
But if we don't have a teacher, then we need to get a licensed teacher the best way we can
absolutely.
for core subjects.
But
So
if
that's,
we, but,
that's why they're coming with the.
oh, definitely, but, and I'm not saying no, that, I'm not saying searches out this haven't seen, but Steve, if we have the opportunity for our teachers to teach our children and have that personal relationship with our parents, that seems much more important than just going right over here. I'm not saying force our teachers, but giving them an opportunity quickly to make that decision is
So
better.
what happens is, when do you need to know before the price is changed?
At the end of this week.
The end of this week. So what happens if we sign the contract, but then we find 25 teachers of our teachers that are willing to do this? Are we stuck with that, or can we change the number that we?
We are committing to sections that the principals share with us based on their staffing at that point in time.
How was it
So how long have you, how long have you guys been working on this, and how long have you been working on this first?
The last couple of weeks, we've been really,
Well, and the idea of doing this with the other teachers just came up off the cuff in a conversation this afternoon. So it was not,
Yeah, and back to the website question was, she didn't have nearly the number of section leads. Last year she canceled, 6 classrooms, 6 sections, so basically 1 teacher. Last year she covered it with overload, because she would prefer to do that.
Yes. Because
We would, but I think the issue is, when you look at this many classrooms, the severity of our staffing issues, and we see it everywhere. I mean, HR shared with me a couple weeks ago that we had a kindergarten position up on one of the elementaries. We had no applicants. I was reading an article today on Chalkbeat, which covers all schools.
And we
And I saw that, yeah, the Avon principal was interviewed and said, I have 2 math openings and no applicants.
Well,
It's just kind of spiraling.
2,300, right, 2,300 openings right now, yeah.
So
on there.
we're watching, good, bad, or otherwise, we are searching for options to try to have certified teachers.
Right,
delivering
If they send us a live body rather than a good teacher, do we have the option of saying this is not acceptable?
Yeah, that's what Dr. Shepherd was sharing, that we would give that feedback and we would like this teacher replaced, because we're struggling with whatever the issue is. Yeah, that's certainly the thing.
So was there an evaluation of the teachers that Elevate provided last year to say that, okay, hey, we would like to have this one back, but not this one? Kind of, sort of?
not a formal evaluation.
Oh, okay, and was there evaluation of the entire program?
Anecdotally, yes.
Is that something we can add?
Yeah.
Is that something we can add? 'Cause
Well, because technically we're paying them, so even because we're signing a contract, so shouldn't they have the same evaluation that we do to our teachers and staff? I mean, wouldn't she,
Some kind of
hold them at the same
evaluation.
level? And no disrespect, but if we so very quickly came up with using our other teachers, like, how did that not come to fruition, like, the second that you thought that this came into play? Yeah, I mean, that's how we need to be thinking. We need to be thinking like our staff, our people, our loyalty, our growth, before we hand it off to the teacher.
I guess we would have to tomorrow reach out to those middle school principals and see what they would like to do.
As we were saying earlier, it's like a form of a hybrid, where that has shown, or data-wise, to not be helpful. Did we get data on every classroom to see if those students at least met a 50% of, or anything? We have
Well, we can pull up the grade information.
Yeah. Because that way we would know whether or not we want that teacher back. If they can't help our students do better than, our middle school data makes me really sit here and want to weep. It's just, and then to think that my grandson's going into 7th grade on West Side, and I can't imagine it getting worse. I just can't, and to me, we're going into a hybrid of virtual, and I'm trying to be super positive about our district and everything. I want so desperately for our outlook to be, and the way that we speak of ourselves to be better. There's no way that we can do that at that middle school level, and it's so sad to me. I'm built for middle schoolers. I love them. I just wish there were more people that got them and loved them and wanted to work with them. I love them so much.
So tonight, do you need us to approve you going forward, or are you just sounding us out?
Probably, they have to know what's after the week.
Well, I know, but, I mean, tonight, what do you need to know?
Well, from what I gather from your comments, we don't sign, we see the price increase, we end up having.
That's not
Okay,
what we're saying, that's not what we're saying.
What I would suggest, and it's up to the rest of the board here also, is that, okay, that we would give a tacit approval or, to moving forward, but in the next 3 days, that everybody hustle to see how much we can take out of your contract. That way you can sign the line.
Ant's got it.
And if you could send the answers to Kelly's question to us by email, just so we can look at that.
So, I don't want to be in a position of holding something up, but, if we can pare this down, that would be to our benefit without committing to money that we don't need to spend.
Well, that has been part of our discussion. I asked them, if we can't get coaches for all these classrooms, what if we can't staff 100, we can staff 85, some other number. They were willing to adjust their minimum.
That's helpful, thank you.
Based on that.
So that basically that question of if we found teachers that did that after we got the contract would be the same thing. I mean, if
So
we
there's
were.
kind of this accordion.
Well, but that's what I'm saying, if they know ahead of time that we're gonna ask our staff and we're gonna commit to this, if we couldn't find coaches, then they were gonna let us off the hook on that certain amount. Why wouldn't that be the same way if we were able to find teachers? I mean.
Well, and it may go the other way if we have more reservations.
So remember,
So it could
always
go.
cup half, always cup half.
Bean counters.
I know, but the bean counter needs to have like joy and hope.
But we did have that
Gonna
conversation with the rep from Elevate about the idea that, our goal is to teachers.
Right. So see, so then that needs to be negotiable, but and.
Okay. This is kind of out there. So if we're covered at the high school and the teachers are secondary teachers, so they have the licenses to teach middle school, correct? So, would it be possible if we are covered and have some leeway at the high school that potentially there could be some teachers that would be willing to cover some of these classes at the middle school level? Because there seems to be a lot of openings here. Is that possible to be able to, if teachers would be willing to shift? Because the situation is much more.
It would partially depend on licensure, because not everybody high school is licensed middle school, but
Okay.
many are. That would be a question to explore with Harry.
Yeah, could explore, but then again, if we take out of high school.
We've got anybody on
Well, that's what I'm asking, because you said that they said that they were
Well,
covered.
They're
So
gonna
I don't.
cover, some of them,
But then you have to.
I know
doing a program.
So that the freshman division. Overload.
Doing the overloads?
I have a question. The rigor for Elevate, is it at the same standard? Do we know? Or are they just phoning it in? How are we able to measure that?
Very good question as well. They do have syllabi that we can examine and compare them to syllabi of our teachers as well. Level on those lines, and their syllabi are built upon content area created standards as well, like from the National Council.
Elevate the only opportunity for us. Is Elevate the only organization like that does this?
remember Dr. Seeger investigated that last year, and landed on Elevate as the best option at that time.
Okay.
And since we have experience with them, that's why we have it.
But we haven't gone beyond that to go back and see if she was right, or, you know, like, if we
Any
got a
other
different
options?
opinion.
So what time on Friday? Is it Friday morning, is it Friday evening, is it,
End of the day, correct?
so 5 p.m. Friday? So in the next couple of days, you guys can check to see how many teachers and then provide the answers to Kelly's questions, and then we could,
Do we do provisional? We do a provisional yes, depending on those, or how do we do that tonight? So that we know.
Everybody is.
It's not even on the agenda.
Yeah, it's gotta be on the,
Oh.
Well, I think we can bring it in under, new business, proposal. I think that would be doable. If the board chooses to.
So, you gotta come up.
Amend the agenda.
I will come up.
Thank you.
Put amend the agenda at the onset of the meeting. To do this, I think also to some extent, you have a general consensus of the board based upon comments without a per se vote at this point in time. You do have a general consensus, I think, of the board on this issue, but if you want to have an official vote giving them authority based on some of the things we talked about tonight to move forward, presuming that all of the conditions of that vote are met, you could do that, so you certainly could move, you could amend the agenda at the onset of meetings to address that particular issue. So that is one option, if you want to actually take official board action on this tonight. Or also you could take board action to authorize Dr. Shepherd and Mr. Scott to continue negotiations with Elevate, and then to bring back to this board for final approval at your next board meeting, the actual contract.
We can just amend the agenda
Yep.
to give the provision.
Stacy, we allow public comment now. She had a couple of questions about the Elevate, or do you want it during the amended public comment?
She, if after we're done, then she can speak. But,
Yeah, during the work session.
yeah, so after we're done discussing, then
Okay.
we can.
Okay.
And by the way, we actually did have, I think, last year, we had a high school teacher who was teaching a middle school class. So we've been doing that already. We haven't done it to the extent that Mrs. Bob was talking about, but I think that's an opportunity for us as well to explore that. And in the long run, obviously, we have to work with the ETA to develop an MOU to cover the time between now and when we develop a collective bargaining agreement to cover how we pay teachers to take on this, especially when we start talking about the idea of two full classes at the same time. And there's travel time. So those are all issues that we have to work through. But I know that the ETA leadership is very creative. And I think together we can certainly put something.
One's rubbing their head, the other one's smiling. I'm like, all right.
It's not really, we might as well let Alex explain that. Okay.
So, is there any public comment?
I just.
Can you stand up and come to the mic, please?
I was just curious about, like, requirements for the proctors for those Elevate classes, like, because you said something about them being paras, do they have to be paras, or like, what are the requirements for that? Because I'm curious if that has anything to do with them not showing up to watch these classes, like, are they just people that are just getting hired, like, could I apply for that position and come in, like,
No, there is a,
that's my question on it, like.
there is a job description.
Okay,
There's a job
that's just my
description.
question, 'cause
It is that job description. And it
Yeah,
goes through
So
all
if
the
everybody could
responsibilities
speak
and
into the mic so the people online can hear properly. Thank you.
Yes, there is a job description.
Is there any other public comment?
Can you bring her a job application?
I was wondering if we could take the kids that are in the Elevate classes, could we section off their ability to start like
their test scores and make it one group instead of by school. Does that make sense?
What do you mean?
Yeah, I don't know if I understand.
So they had the presentation where they actually, the scores off by school, could you do that by class? For the elevate, for just the elevate?
Oh, yeah,
The individual classes instead of by school.
Yes,
Yes?
yeah.
Well, that would be a way to mark.
Dr. Shepherd.
Oh. Yes, we can run, pretty, by.
Okay, so, that would be a way to mark the elevate classrooms and the teachers that are performing in them. That's it, to evaluate it. Good, yeah, good, thank you.
So you were saying something about the syllabus? Why are they not using our syllabus?
Well, the syllabus is, their syllabus is more of a general than a day by day.
Okay, but does that mean a specific question? It's
It doesn't cover the same content.
Right.
Right.
So why would we want to use Elevate if they're not gonna cover what we want to cover?
Is there an option for them to use, like, is there an option for us to have input on the syllabus, or are we stuck with whatever they offer?
Well, I guess the best answer is when they offer a course in seventh grade English, it's meeting the state requirements of seventh grade English, of course, that they are offering for state of Indiana, just like their teachers are certified.
And the way the course works is that there's instruction and then there are built-in modules of assessment, like spot checks at the time and work that the kids do, and then assessments, and so that's all kind of preloaded, so you're buying the course as it's designed by Elevate. And those standards correspond to state standards and national standards for that.
So there's no option for any adjustments or anything to their syllabus. Is that what I'm hearing you say? No, there is not.
Here's what I would, hang out here. What I would say is that the contract that has it written says that they're going to provide instruction that meets Indiana academic standards. So their syllabus would have to meet Indiana academic standards, just the same as, I'm gonna pick on Alex, because I like to pick on Alex. Alex is a syllabus for a course that has Indiana's academic standards would meet those. Now, could we have input into the syllabus? My answer to that would be everything's negotiable. The question always is whether or not they're willing to agree to that. That is not a negotiation that we've entered into with them in the past, however.
So then you're not sure if we have that capability. And is that something that
I think
will be
that is
explored?
something that we can ask. Absolutely.
Is there, is there any opportunity to explore other options than just Elevate, or we're just going with Elevate because we've used it before and we're comfortable?
Yeah.
And we're at a.
There were other companies that were looked at that we could go back and look at, we might go through that process, how long it would take to get into negotiations with those other companies. And if we got the kids,
Did they say why they're raising their prices this Friday? Friday, like,
inflation.
Oh, inflation.
Wow.
I mean, in terms of.
And what they're doing is that previous customers, they'll give to the end of this week. That they have.
Okay.
Is there any other public comment? Okay. Oh, where? Oh, come up, man. Sorry, I didn't see.
She's got that job application already.
No, I do, I just wanna make a comment in regards to your question. Because I would really love to be able to have an opportunity to have a group of individuals that are interested in the proctor or being able to facilitate that with K-12 Elevate. And one of the questions was, what were some of the challenges challenges as to why we didn't have enough people to staff it and how we were staffing it. And it really depended on the different buildings and what their staffing needs were. We were using paraprofessionals, we were using substitute teachers, we had administrators. But what it really boiled down to is that the position would fall under the paraprofessional category. And the challenge is that our compensation scale, it's not conducive to attracting someone to those positions. So that was one of the challenges. So as we are looking at adding more proctors, I think it would also be beneficial to look at that compensation schedule. And I'm just putting it out there because I would not like to mislead you in any way. I certainly will love your assistance, and if you know of anybody else who would be interested to be able to provide that support to the students, I would certainly welcome that. But also in full disclosure, that has been one of the challenges, it has been a compensation schedule.
You know, I'm all for paying our paraprofessionals.
And we have had those discussions, we continue to have those discussions to see how that's possible. And given the urgency and your excitement, I wanted to. I'm like, let me get the opportunity.
I'd like to see her, like, balance it into her full schedule now as it is, right now. Yeah.
I'm gonna pay more than I already make right now. So, let me know.
Yeah.
Check into it.
I just wanted to make that comment as to what
Yeah.
I'm telling. Thank
Making
you.
that comment.
I think when we look at our district across the board, we want to make sure that we do what's best for all the staff. And I think that we do the best that we can with what we are able to work with. But certainly, as we're looking at it,
Is there any other public comment? Okay, meeting adjourned, we'll break for 5 minutes before we start the next meeting.
so expensive.
But now that we want to do a big gap,
I'm not trying to bitch out.
Yeah, whatever.
and we need to change the microphone down to
I'll make sure.
I don't mind. Early June.
Oh, okay.
We just went on vacation.
No, it was Christmas.
Oh.
I'm going to call to order the board meeting, if everybody can stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Elkhart Promise. Every student is known by name, challenged, and supported by highly effective staff, and in partnership with the community, will graduate career, college-ready, and life-ready.
Thank you, Arthur. So, there's an invitation to speak protocol. You should have a half sheet of paper on your chair. Turn it in to Dora. You'll have 3 minutes to speak at the end of the meeting. Also, with the rules changing as of July 1st, we'll have public comment, so you don't have to raise your hand or anything. After the board discussion, I'll ask if there's any public comment. Once the public comment has, ended, everybody else had a chance, and we moved on to the next topic, you'll have to wait until the end for your 3 minutes to speak on the topic that's already been closed. We have a moment of pride first. Tara, you are up.
Good evening. So, thank you for having me here tonight. I'm excited to share a moment of pride tonight. So, 4 years ago, Elkhart Community Schools began a partnership with Smeckens Education to provide training for teachers across all grade levels to improve instruction for students in the areas of reading comprehension, writing, and early literacy skills. Through this collaboration, our teachers have received high energy, as you will see in the video in a minute, high quality, targeted and personalized instruction from the veteran teacher experts at Smeckens. Each year, Smeckens offers a variety of professional development opportunities for teachers across the country, with their premier event, CompCon, taking place each summer in several locations across the Midwest, and this year, expanding to 2 virtual sessions as well. I am proud to share that our ECS teachers were the stars of the show this year. The video highlight reel you are about to see features the work of 9 Elkhart staff members whose efforts and dedication to the quality of instruction of their students are a model for teachers across the country. During the CompCon sessions you will see here, Christina Smeckens shared both through pictures and videos the great examples of literacy instruction going on in Elkhart Community Schools. And as this video will also show, I'm confident that there are teachers all over America now asking, where is Elkhart, Indiana, and how did they get all of these amazing teachers?
Welcome to CompCon 2022. We are so glad that you are with us and live. We have 344 of you registered for our event. That's 21 different states, and I've already seen some coming through. Utah, Arizona, Texas, Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana. Lots and lots already coming through. Wisconsin, New Hampshire, I'm seeing ya. This is awesome. I'm going to share a conversation, kind of a synopsis of a conversation I had with and answer questions. That's the lesson she wants to do another week and build onto, then she brings that to the front of the room. See the hole? You see the hole in her wall? And she just literally removed it and brought it up. And she teaches a little more, she grows the anchor chart, and then when the week is over, it goes back up there. Let's actually see this in action. This is Morgan Smith, that first grade teacher who in that guided work time had an anchor chart wall, that I took a photo of. Well, here we go. Morgan has taught her first graders how to retell. She's told them how to do it. And now it's step 2B, all right? She has 5 minutes to apply what she has told them that this includes. So I'm gonna play it. Let's see it. You take them. We are going to talk about remember that book? Yeah. Dragon football tacos. I'm going to use this story. Dragons don't like spicy salt. I'm not really sure what that was going to play. Yeah, I was going to leave it there. The boy in my house was some dragon. Next. The house got burned down by the dragon. And so, finally, the dragon helps rebuild the house together. That's it. I don't need to know everything else about the story. I just retold all the important stuff about setting characters and plots. And that's what I do. You don't help me. Nobody was raising their hand. Nobody was calling me. She had those 7-year-olds trained. When I do it first, you watch and listen to it. Your purpose is to learn from me. So let me show this to you. So powerful. And Tony Venable was a middle school teacher here in Moran in Elkhart, Indiana, and he was trying to get his kids to work on main idea. He knew they read this, and he was like, I don't know if they can get main idea out of all of this. So we kind of selected, well, which paragraph led to this stuff to figuring out main idea. So then he started to delete or cover up the other time. Tony, I'm not trying to read that whole thing again to figure out the main idea. This is Elizabeth Ordonis from Eastwood Elementary in Elkhart, and her partner, Ellen Nunez. And they took their extra live view, student basal, and extra copies, and they ripped it apart. And they, look at this image here, in the top middle of this yellow lab, and it says, look pretty. That means it would be great for masters on those too.
So I know that it's daunting, a daunting task, but once you understand those skills that are the majority, the major skills that we need to be covering, it's easy to go through each story, because if you look at the beginning of each story, it'll tell you to inform, to entertain, which we know is author's purpose. That is one of those skills that we really need to cover. A lot of these stories, they have several skills so that's why we have like 1 or 2 or 3 tabs on each story. It only took, once we had the skills set up, it only took an hour and a half to flip through all the stories and discover which skill it goes in for our playbook.
Remember Morgan Smith, that first grade teacher, we saw some clips of her I-News and we-News? Okay, so this is what she did. Morgan, she used the basal, right? She used the basal, and look in the far left here, unit 1, and she literally just typed in order the passages from the base. Yep, she just lists them, because that's the order they're in the book. Okay, but then she used the playbook to figure out what skill am I teaching, and what round would that go with? And you know what? You can even have a video. I gotta show you this video by Trisha Kuchera from Pinewood Elementary in Elkhart, Indiana. Check out this primary, this kindergarten people, kindergarten student. And one. My team is like, what's this? And make curtain page. Do you see what's happening? That's you do all by yourself, and that was during COVID, when mom was there recording with the child on the iPhone. This is awesome. It's exactly the kind of music that's appropriate. I don't know if that seems awfully complicated. It seems like a hot mess to organize what we're doing at this point and what we're doing at this point and what I don't know. Well, let me introduce you to Courtney Moreno. She's a fourth grade teacher at Riverview Elementary in Elkhart, Indiana. And Courtney is going to tell you how she organized this way.
Courtney Moreno, I'm a fourth grade teacher at Riverview, and this is just my second binder, as I would call it, where I've organized all of our information that we've been using pretty much since the beginning of the school year. And it's organized by week. So, every play we have a section for, and within each play there's also a specific section for each side of the pamphlet or each side of the play. So, for example, on week 8 of the school year, we worked on analyzing authors' choices for the second round. So within this section of the binder, we've organized our whole group information. So these are some of the resources we use to help with our whole group mini lessons. And then because we follow the 3-week rotation, our small group obviously isn't analyzing authors' choices too. So we've organized our small group sources within this week that we would be using. So it was actually comparing 2 texts. So all of our comparing 2 text small group sources are in this little pocket. And then C-work is also different than both whole group and small group, which it was specifically character traits.
Get it? Are you seeing it? Are you seeing what she did? She like literally built it in one divider packet. She had all of that accounted for. You don't have to do it the way Courtney did it, but it is possible. Take all the sticky notes, or do what Tim Ewan did from Riverview Elementary in Elkhart, Indiana, and you each time you read one chart paper and face the chart paper. All right, class, watch me. And this is what Kim did with her fourth graders. They already knew RA and 1C. So she reminded them, she wrote it. Then she said, remember the C. Then she added and taught them how to write the next C. This is all her ideas. This is all her ideas. And I love that she honors there's a key, but not yet, and not yet. That's next week. We point out that this was a kindergarten teacher at Monster, the story with me. And this is a perfect example. She has already taught them story elements and how to do a basic detail. Put most important character in setting detail in the beginning, most important problem detail in the middle, most important is the solution detail at the end. She taught the lesson round 3, kindergarten round 3 and start 3. She already taught it. Like days later, they read Hansel and Gretel and she said, all right, I'd like you to write in the church. Write the beginning of our retell. Write the middle of the retell. Write the end of your end. But that's not in the lesson. Warriors taught the lesson. It's our time. It's your time. You got the rest of the song. You are so happy you've attended and you've learned this. But now, our time. Take advantage of the time you have and let's get familiar with the phrase. Tie into your text. Get your anchor charts ready. Get your room ready. Figure out how you're going to use it. And then, every step of the way, when you're like, how do I keep time? You're going to know. Whether it's myself or any of my consultants, whether it's our remote coaches, Bridget and Monica, we are ready. It's our time. I think to hear your best guess. Teach. Breathe. Coach.
Okay, I'd like to introduce you to one of these rock star teachers, Morgan Smith.
first grade teacher at Oslo, who's going to share with you how she has used this professional development and instructional strategies in her classroom. Morgan.
Thank you. First off, isn't it amazing to see our Elkhart teachers shining on a national level?
Yes.
And right now in Shipshewana, there are 200 more educators from this region hearing Christina Smeckens talk about Elkhart. So hopefully that will help with some HR issues too. First off, Smeckens is not a curriculum. It is teaching us about our standards. So specifically this playbook that we got last year with the Smeckens team focused just on the comprehension skills. You could ask 5 different teachers what these comprehension standards mean, and you get 5 different interpretations. So what the Smeckens team has done is said, this is your lane for these comprehension skills, and this is how you build it. Because Howie Conley is right, we have been building the gap ourselves. And with this, our students are now going to have common language from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade with your comprehension, so that we can start building some of those comprehension scores for our students. Not just for standardized testing, but to help them in the future become the best that they can be. We have to honor their growth also, and the Smeckens helps to do that by making sure we rotate through, because when COVID hit in 2020, so many things weren't taught. And so now we shuffle that through and scaffold through to make sure that doesn't happen, to avoid that collateral damage. So I just want to thank you for giving us the opportunity. None of this would have happened also if we didn't have Smeckens coming into our buildings quarterly, working with us. So they come in and coach us and meet with every single person in the building to make sure we understand, because they really are just an email away. So I hope that we can continue to work with them and build our reading and writing skills with our students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Finally, I just want to say thank you to all the teachers across the district who've already embraced and implemented these best practices in their teaching. In addition to those mentioned in the video, I spent 2 full days this summer with 30 of our teachers participating in this CompCon virtually, and I've spent countless hours after school in the summer, during the school day, over the last 4 years with teachers doing this work. So this is really a celebration and honor of all of them who put forth that effort. So thank you.
I have a question. Are the Smeckens in here quarterly?
Yes.
Is that what I just heard?
Yes. So
Okay.
we have days scheduled for all of our buildings.
Okay, and does Smeckens also give us a quarterly evaluation of what their observations are?
Yeah, so we have feedback with them. I meet with them very regularly. We talk about the vision, so what did we accomplish last year? So like one of the things that we talked about this year in the debrief is that we're getting much better at the reading comprehension. So now how do we transition into not just understanding reading, but writing about reading? As Mindy said, that writing piece is another thing. So we kind of did that analysis at the end of last year to plan for what we're going to do this year.
Is it possible for you to come back in another work session and kind of give us a overview of, Smeckens' evaluation of, our strengths and weaknesses and, the things are the good things, as well as the things that need to be improved upon? That would be a good thing.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions for Morgan? I don't want to leave her out.
Nice job.
All right. Thank you.
So do you have something?
Yes, I do. Start this off, I would like to make a motion, Madam President, to amend the agenda to include preliminary approval of a contract with Elevate.
Is there a motion?
Second.
Okay.
Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes. I'll add it to the agenda. Consent item? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second. Is there any discussion? No donation? Wow. Is that a first? I'll match you, Kelly. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Old business, Elkhart, you're up.
Not quite sure how I feel about my interviews this whole business.
Well,
I mean, if it's your business, I mean, I can't argue against it. All right, this evening, the administration is bringing, for, further review, two proposals, board policies related to adjustments to compensation plans. The first, is board policy 3421.01A. This is professional staff contracts and compensation plans for administrators. We have bringing to the board for further consideration this evening a recommendation to create a new administrative position, Director of English Learning. This position will provide direction to instructional staff at all levels, focusing on developing the language skills of students identified as English language learners, so that these students can reach proficiency. This is expected to have a direct impact on the performance of these students on standardized tests. In addition to overseeing this position, this individual will be expected to lead professional development for instructional staff, and importantly, to be in our buildings to provide coaching support to school-based EL staff. And really, when we talk about school-based EL staff, that's all of our teachers, not just EL licensed teachers. The cost of this position will be covered by the elimination of a presently vacated coaching position. And in addition to that, there will be some NAEP funding that will support this position. As I noted above, this employee will actually assume the coaching responsibilities of our former coach in addition to their administrative responsibilities. In addition to the proposal to add this administrative position, the administration is also recommending the elimination of the assistant athletic director position. This position previously was held by Josh Shattuck, who has left the district. The assistant AD position had a pay range between $60,000 and $75,000. The bulk of the work performed by the former assistant AD will be accomplished by the scheduling coordinator position that was approved by the board last month. That new position has a pay range between $55,000 and $70,000 for 11-month contract. Actually, 11-month calendar as a miscellaneous employee. That individual would not have a contract. Beth Williams is present to answer any questions that might relate to the EL position, and our athletic directors are here to answer questions about both the position that was approved at the last board meeting as well as the elimination of the assistant athletic director position. So, bring it back to the board for questions that you might have about both of those positions.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Now, is there any discussion?
Yeah, I have a question. First, thank you for the answer to our questions. I really appreciate that and giving us more context. One of the questions that I had when I was reading here, when we talked about the goals, and one of the things was, one of the last ones that said, and I just need more of an explanation or clarification. The second year would look to have PSYOP implementation across more classes and subject areas to increase the percentage of EL students reaching proficiency. So my question is, I thought we were all doing that already.
We are. So what we're asking in the elementary is to have content or language objectives in a particular subject, one subject to start the year, layer in another subject as you go through the year, and then next year we're layering in more subjects so the teachers are getting very proficient at the content and proficiency standards. If I'm a high school teacher, I would be doing content and language standards for one of my courses.
Okay.
And then I'm going to layer in more courses as I go through the year, with the expectation being in the second year, we're closer to doing that in every single class.
Okay. And then the only other comment that I have in that area is when we're looking at our goals, and when I was looking at the data to see where we're at and what we're going, I think we need to be more aggressive.
Okay. And it's interesting, the question I got from somebody was, is the jump from 4 to 10 too much? So.
Well, but when I looked at,
I didn't say too much, I said, was it too ambitious?
Was it too ambitious?
Well, and the reason that I said that is because when I looked at the data, and we've already, and the data that you gave us last time, the bottom of the table where it breaks down, you've got 3 to 3.9, but you gave us data from 3.5 to 3.9 and 4. So I'm looking at that, and I'm seeing how many kids are already halfway through. So I would hope that we would want to try and get the kids that are in the 4.5 to 4.9, the 3.5 to 3.9 to get those, and that's more than the 6% increase of where we are today. And I would also, as far as the goals go, is I would look at, when we're looking at, have goals, and there may be, because you mentioned the learning plan that we haven't seen yet, but, you know, we had 52% of our students that stayed the same. So I would think we want to have a goal of some kind that that number is smaller, that much more kids that are moving up and not staying the same than half our kids. And so I would just really like to see us be a little more intentional and aggressive in making sure that everybody realizes, and I know they do, and I don't want this to come off that people aren't working hard. I know they're working hard. And I appreciate that. But what I'm looking at it is I'm looking at it from a student perspective and the time and the gaps that we have to close and how their schooling has been interrupted and being able to catch them up so they aren't falling further and further behind. And so that's why my sense of urgency is for us to try and be as aggressive as possible and to get these kids moving so that they can be successful. Because we all know when we have kids who are successful, whether it's reading or whatever it is, behaviors go down too. And so if we can just, you know, people can just, you know, push along and realize that's what we're here for, to get these numbers so that they're at the top end, and the lower ends are getting smaller. So that would be my kind of plea from that standpoint.
As far as moving students along too, so when you're looking at English language learners, it definitely depends on the grade level that they're in. And so when we get to that, past that 6th grade,
it gets harder.
Much more challenging. So to get a 3.5 to a 5.0 in a year is very difficult.
Well, no, I understand it, but my point being that, you know, we had talked last time that the K-5 is really the critical age group because it gets so much harder 6 to 8 with the testing. And my point is not necessarily just to get the 3s to the 5s, but just to get them to a 4. Just to get people so that what we're looking at, that the goal should be that we get as many people moving levels as we possibly can. And then those, so that way, and we had such a small number for 5 and 6 that we really want to push those next groups that are close based on the data that you gave us. And I just want to be able to say, hey, we're going to work really hard targeting these kids to get them to the point where they are proficient. And we're not having kids fall back.
Right, absolutely.
That's my only point, is I want us to be a little more aggressive in what we're trying to accomplish.
I would agree with Anne's comments.
I think the benefit, I'm sorry, Ann.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the benefit of this position is somebody whose sole focus will be on exactly what you're talking about, as opposed to, I can't say enough positive things about Beth Williams. It's impossible. But the point is, while Beth has given a great deal of attention to this, she also has so many other burdens that that's really the rationale for trying to separate this out in terms of responsibility.
So my question is more about providing some context with the job description. I asked Dr. Tarmer a couple of questions the other day. He didn't really have context. So I don't know if this question is for you, Beth, or for Brad. My concern would be how much is this person going to be in the buildings working hand in hand with the principals or with the coaches. I think that's an invaluable part. I know their office will be here, and it's not specifically stated that way in the job description. What is the expectation, and can the job description be altered to reflect that more specifically? So can you provide some context.
Sure, and that's the reason, you know, for needing this position too, is that this person needs to be out in the building all the time. I can get out in the buildings, but I can only get out so much, time during the day when students are in. So it's needed, and we'll have the coach and, the director. So they'll be out in the buildings. We have a plan for them to be out in the buildings. We have a plan for principals to be working with their EL teachers, scheduled time that we will know about. And, the director will then be in, and there'll be walkthroughs that are already scheduled, times with principals. So this person will be out in the building a lot.
So is that spelled out in the job description?
No,
I think we can make some adjustments to
No.
the position description to talk about that. I think one of the things that, and we talked briefly about this 2 weeks ago, we discussed the position, questions related to the evaluation process and their role in that. If you look at the model that has always been in place with our special education department in terms of those supervisors, they do play a role and have played a role in terms of evaluation. So I think it might make sense to clarify the position description from that standpoint, which I think that's exactly what Ms. Davis was talking about, because if we're saying they have a role in the evaluation of those, not the complete role, but a role as a partner with the building principal, that's yet another method to get them out in the building as much as possible.
so that's what the language says, collaborate with, blah, blah, blah. But you can collaborate via email,
Right.
through apps, through Zoom, it doesn't say in-person, hands-on, one-on-one, you know what I mean?
Right.
So,
And that's what we meant, but we can.
yeah, I would say,
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, the first step is to get the position approved by you as an additional administrative position. We can continue to work on fleshing out that position description, meet the expectations of the board. I don't think it'll be too difficult to make those changes. I have a phenomenal HR director back there, plus these two phenomenal people, and I can kid it a little bit.
yeah. I just think that's important because a lot of the complaints sometimes we hear that people are not present and given the kind of help that is needed. So if this position is important working with them, I think it's important to have it in the job description. My other question is about the secretary. I know Dr. Tallheimer kind of said the secretary will be just assisting this one director, but some of the other secretaries assist several directors. So my question is, if this secretary is only helping one director, is this really a full-time job? And if not, what else is she going to be doing? Because it doesn't seem like 40 hours would require to just assist one person.
So there's a lot of data management, in that description, managing the WIA AMS, and, but yes, I would say it's close to a full-time position. That person could assist with other secretaries that are helping. Also, we are saying that this, person must be bilingual. There's a great need for us up in instructional leadership that we get a lot of phone calls, especially when it comes to our EL parents and programs. And sometimes we have to kind of find somebody who can talk to them, explain, and we don't want to have to pass our parents on to another phone call. They'll get the service right there when they call. But yes, they can certainly help.
I just wondered if that had been thought out, because it just made me wonder would they be busy enough for 4 hours, just considering the others help more than 1 hour.
We'll make sure that the successful candidate understands that their scope is not just limited to that program. They are part of the instructional leadership department. I think that's the right concern.
Is that in the job description, not under as other duties?
No, it will be specifically in there. Again, we'll finalize that.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
No problem.
Is there any other discussion?
Yeah, now is where, because this, motion right here deals with several positions and stuff like that, and, as we try to advance, one, area of our organization and stuff like that, are we robbing Peter to pay Paul? And I think they had to do it the athletic position right there, and I'd kind of like to hear, more about,
I'm glad you mentioned that, Mr. Weaver, because I invited my friends, the athletic directors, to be here to answer your question.
You're welcome for the introduction.
Ms. Davis, Mr. Paulheimer, members of the board, Brian Buckley, Elkhart Community Schools, Athletic Department.
Jackie Ross, Athletic Department.
All right. We, 2 or 3, 4, 5 years ago, we started working on a plan for athletics to vertically align, to redevelop our department, and to put individuals in a place to be successful. When Josh Shattuck decided to leave, it gave us an opportunity to repurpose this position to better fit the needs of our department and of the athletics for all of Elkhart. So basically what we've done is Josh had a unique contract in that he was the football coach, he was the assistant athletic director, and he also had the opportunity to oversee a weight class for 90 minutes a day, in which he was not the lead teacher or teacher of record, but he was out of the department at that time. Which, when we were 2 different schools, that fit that need perfectly. As we came together, that doesn't fit our need any longer. We need somebody in there that is going to be full K through 12 dedicated athletic. And we started this process a year ago by adding our elementary athletic director, which is a great process, and it's rolling along. You all know we lost Barry Stingray. He moved on. We're actively pursuing getting that position filled along with Ms. Bickle, because they also do some attendance for elementary. Just in the last 6 months, Dr. Tolheimer has asked us, and the board asked us to revisit how we could support and help middle school athletics. And we've had some great meetings with those folks, and we've been able to already make some adjustments going into next year that will support that alignment we're looking for. So what we feel like is we didn't need another administrator in our office. We need a doer. We need somebody that's going to really embrace the full scope of what we're trying to do in athletics. And that's what we believe this position can do. They will still take on those same tasks of scheduling events. They will still take on the same task of transportation, but they'll also add to us that liaison with middle school and elementary so that they feel like they have a voice to come into our office so that we can help support them. Just some quick statistics for you. Athletics is 261 days a year. We have 10,440 hours of practice time alone. So imagine scheduling on our 5-mile circumference campus, where there's 24 playing facilities just in the high school areas. Just scheduling practices is amazing compared to what it used to be. There's nobody in the state that can compare to what we have right now. We have 15 concession stands. Again, there's nobody in the state that has 15 concession stands that they're managing. Most athletic departments aren't even managing a concession stand. Most of that comes out of either boosters or somewhere else. So I'll be happy to, so I don't get on a soapbox here, but that's why we feel we're doing the right thing by eliminating an administrator, putting a scheduling coordinator in there that will be full-time part of the athletic director's athletic department to help us go in the right direction. I'm happy to answer questions if you have questions or comments.
It sounds like you haven't, implemented the changes that you're speaking about yet. Would it be possible for you to bring back to the board, several different options of an organizational chart that is doable for realigning the athletic department?
Sure, that's been approved twice by the board. So this will be the 3rd time, so we're happy to do that. Okay. I mean, or would you like to see a change from what we had approved? I want to make sure I get this right.
I'm just looking for, options.
Okay.
Is what I'm looking at. You don't have to change anything particularly at this point, but I was just like, okay, you talked about, the alignment, and realignment and the position changes and stuff like that. It just seems to me like now is maybe a time to, take the evaluation, maybe a step further than we have in the past, and take a look at that.
Sure. I think that may be a question.
Suggestions for us about how you want it to look?
No, I'd rather,
step further, I'm not sure what that
I'd rather, hear, what your suggestions, might be.
My question would be do you feel like you're far enough along in your work with middle school and understanding their needs and where that is to to make such a suggestion, or does that process need to play out some more?
I think what we just wanna update to see what's happened since the last time you gave us one about during our retreat, which has been a couple months ago. I think maybe that's just what we wanna update to see what's.
Since that time, I think the middle school AD.
You don't have to do it now, but
Yeah.
that's when you come back. I
Quick
think that-
answer, not a lot has happened with the task force for the middle school activities directors don't work in the summer. That happened at the end of the year. So the plan is, I think, for them to start with the task force, and they do have individuals who wanted to be a part of that. I think they presented some of the feedback that they got when they were here with us, that work session. So one, I think, really important caveat of this role is we want that person to be a liaison, and it's actually stated that way in the job description that they would be a liaison. They would be evaluating, they're not their boss, they would be that connector, which we think is really important between the high school head coaches and staff and the middle school. There definitely has been disconnect in some of the programs.
So I think I'm a little confused as kind of the day-to-day what this person will be doing, so can you kind of explain that?
Absolutely. The job description primarily is scheduling. So they will schedule all contracts with opponents for all of our sports at the high school. They'll schedule all officials. They'll schedule all transportation. They will schedule all of our facilities, whether it's practices or contests. And sometimes it's outside groups. Sometimes it's school groups, you know, student government, band is using our facilities as well. So we have a platform, an online platform that we use to schedule. We really had to go to that when our campus grew so much. Primarily, that's what they'll do all day. Josh did a lot of that as well. However, the scope of a lot of those duties changed big time. Not anyone's fault. It's just there are less officials. We've had to be really creative with some of our opponents. We're maybe hosting 2 or 3 JV games on a Saturday because with other schools because there aren't enough officials. We're sharing officials. There certainly have been challenges with transportation. That's added a lot more to that position as well. So a lot of the similar day-to-day stuff that Josh did, but all of that has grown just because of how the challenges in athletics have changed. Sure.
But can you tell me, or Jackie, either one, in round figures, how many student athletes do we have participating in all our high school sports?
600?
Total. 600 from lacrosse to football.
In high school, yeah. And again, we can get exact. We provided those numbers last time, so we can get exact for you, but off the top of my head, that's
Okay, and how many sports?
20 varsity sports, many more teams than that. I can tell you we do 520 varsity events in 180 days. I can tell you that we are one of the state leaders. We host boys soccer sectional, girls volleyball sectional, boys and girls cross country sectional, boys and girls cross country regional, football sectional, boys basketball sectional, both NIC swim meets, girls swim sectional, NIC wrestling sectional, boys basketball semi-state, NIC girls boys track meet, and softball sectional.
So in the peak
That's all
season,
extra on our normal.
in the peak seasons, how many different events are going on in a single week? Both home and away?
Fall is probably the busiest. We have the most teams. On
9 teams.
any given day, there could be 4 events at one time.
Oh, at least.
Just at home.
I don't think there's any doubt that this position is needed. I mean, just juggling what you're talking about. You know, you need somebody who can take care of this. And we don't have Josh doing it anymore. So we're eliminating an administrative position, putting in a different position, cutting pay. I don't see a question with this.
I have a question, and I'm just wondering as I'm reading this, when I'm looking at the qualifications and the education experience, I'm just wondering if you're limiting people to apply, because you've got demonstrated success in the development of athletic programs, as well as experience as a coach, and then demonstrated success as a coach at the high school level. So
We did talk about those with Mr. Thorne, and those would be, nice to have, but we're not gonna eliminate somebody because they don't have that.
Okay. Felt like that.
I think when we talked about this the last time, I'm sorry, when we talked about this the last time, we talked about moving those to preferred qualifications. In other words, it'd be nice if you have that,
And if it's between candidate A and candidate B, and they're equally qualified, well, then we're gonna go for the candidate has the preferred qualifications. But so those are not all gonna be required qualifications on the code. I think the position description you have, predates the changes that we talked about.
Because me reading it, I would be like, well, you know, maybe somebody wouldn't apply if that's the preferred of what they're looking for, and I don't have any experience as a coach or so-and-so, so I probably wouldn't apply. So that was, and I know it's very difficult to find people to begin with, so I just want to make sure we're not limiting ourselves and canceling some people out that maybe don't have coaching experience or development program experience, but could be a kick-ass do person that is very organized, detailed, and would be great at that.
Absolutely.
Well, the marriage, I'm sorry, yes, go ahead.
It should say leadership instead of coaching, because that's what we're looking for is leadership. So that's a really good point.
But there is a lot of credibility with somebody who has some coaching background, who's going to be working with other coaches. Well, and that's kind of what part of that, because I was looking at when you're looking at as a liaison to the middle school activities director, I could see where
Leadership.
that would be too. But you can be a great leader and not be a coach of a sports team. I think you do have to have an understanding, though, of building skills.
Yeah.
Sure, no. Part was important. Okay, yeah.
Go ahead, Jan.
How much money are we saving?
We could say, we're gonna save between $14,000 and $27,000 depending on the qualifications and where HR puts this person. A minimum of 14, a maximum of 27,000.
Does it alleviate stress off of the others that are working inside of those kiosks?
Yeah, I won't get here for a long time, but I'm gonna give you a really quick example. Let's say rain day, one rain day, May 3rd, and you get rain. Baseball's canceled, softball's canceled, tennis is canceled, golf is canceled, track's delayed, and you have to reschedule. By the bylaws for our NIC, you have to reschedule the very next day for the conference game you're gonna play. But maybe tomorrow we're gonna play Concord, that's a sectional opponent. So by rescheduling on Tuesday, you have to reschedule on Wednesday, maybe Wednesday bumps Fairfield, and you have to reschedule that. Officials, workers, concessions, and that's just baseball game. Now look at softball, tennis, so that's why this is a crazy job. And this would really help.
And I think a qualitative piece to that is, could we do that? Yeah, it would be stressful, but it would eliminate some of the other, I think, really good things that we started and we put in place that we're doing with athletes. Some of the leadership building, and training and seminars that we're able to do. So I would worry that we would lose some of that.
Is there any other board discussion? Is there any public questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Okay, the next item would kind of circle back to the modifications to the secretarial official compensation plan, the addition of that secretary, and I think some of the comments already, that have been made by the board members, you can add into that position description to clarify that they are not just working for that one individual, but may have other duties within the department. And I think part of that can be alleviated by making it clear that they don't report just to the EL director, but also report to Dr. Shepherd.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Is there any public questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you, board members.
Kevin Scott, you're up.
Okay, this first item, so I'd like to mention for Jason Emmons. Jason's requesting the next cycle of used iPad sales. As you recall, the first cycle that we did this generated $123,520. And so with that, the President would ask for permission of the board to sell iPads.
Move to approve.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Is there any public comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you. The next item is informational only. annual financial report is required to appear in the newspaper, the local newspaper, between August 1st and August 15th. And the board secretary gets to have his name printed in the so.
Oh.
Again, I want to thank Mrs. Vondervellen. She called and asked me a number of questions, very good questions about this. That's something we do every year. There's a volume of information in that annual report. Moving on then to the final, the next item that I have is, for only the second time in my years of work with schools, the IRS has done a mid-year adjustment to the mileage rate. And the mileage rate is in our master contract. And so, as you recall, we come at the organizational meeting in January with a slate of items that name me as the treasurer, set our mileage rate, determine the newspaper, those type of things. We set the mileage rate at 58.5 cents at that time. Effective July 1st, the IRS has bumped that rate up by 4 cents. So, Madam President, asking for the board to approve the change in the
Move to approve. Second.
Is there any discussion? Any public comment or question? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Okay.
And then, the final item then is preliminary approval of the Elevate K-12. As we discussed earlier, depending on information that Dr. Shepherd will collect and pass on to the board.
So moved.
Second.
And is there any discussion? That will also include figuring out if we have any teachers that wanna. Is there any questions or
Teach
comments?
their prep and provide an overview.
Any public questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed. Is there any comments from the audience too? Oh, just one. Alex?
I just have some good news to share, related to data. It was interesting to me, Jeff, that at the first meeting, we were talking about NWEA data and lots of things with kindergarten and first grade and elementary students. I had something related to high school to celebrate. It's not really my celebration to have, other than I'm the content area specialist for math, so I just didn't get in the way and screw it up, I guess. My part in this. Yeah, I would just like to recognize the two teachers who were involved with these results, and this is advanced placement AB calculus. Tough course, for challenging. It would be interesting to know the number of students that had each score. I know there are more questions that can come from this, and I appreciate that. I'd be happy to dig through. It is interesting to me. I used to look at results like this broken down by state. I don't think the College Board is doing that anymore. I spent this afternoon looking for it so I could share this information kind of in the context of the whole state. You know, what percent of students got a 5 in Indiana, what percent got a 4. And just to explain for anybody doesn't know, advanced placement, the highest score gets a 5. You know, the highest score goes down to a 1. You put your name on the exam. So to have, as a school, 78.8%, so I'm looking at the bottom of the sheet that I gave you, I circled it. Yeah, as a school, that 78.8% get a 3 or higher, you can get a sense for the whole state, maybe 53.1, that fits the same description. It's really good. Again, two teachers are to be commended, and it's Amy Semantic and Jill Haller and Barnes. Yeah, they're both outstanding. And I would like to suggest, work for somebody else to do, so I don't end up doing this. I already told them congratulations. I emailed them. I don't know what the standard would be, and I don't want it to be in math, but as important as college credits are, and preparation for college and AP exams, if maybe there was some standard that the board set, if your students exceeded
and or national pass rates, you know, whether it's the percent of students with 3 or higher, or maybe the average score, because we do get that congratulatory letter from the board. I think would be really nice. I don't have to do it. Again, more work for somebody else. I love coming up with work for other people to do.
Very kind of you.
But I would like to suggest it. And there are other results like this. I didn't have it in as presentable a format, but the AP Computer Science results look just like this.
That's awesome.
The BC calculus, which frankly most high schools don't offer because it's so hard to find a teacher who can do math. Same thing. So we had some outstanding results for our students, and I just wanted to commend everybody involved because, you know, through the COVID period too. So there was a time when these students, I know some of them were great kids. I mean, wonderful kids. I didn't teach them in this class, but I saw them in other courses. They did 3 months from home in 2020, March 2020, and a lot of them were with me. You know, I know what we did for those 3 months. You know, they were dedicated. They for about 2 to 3 months, but you know, that's the only way I had. For 2 to 3 months, they did great. And then the next year being hybrid, you know, with a teacher every other day, the teachers did well, the kids did well, and they're coming out on this side, making everybody look good. Thank you for everything that you did to help that happen. That's my report. I love to answer questions. It's great.
I think this is, you know, phenomenal. Can we, get this to, you know, Brenda in some format that we can communicate it, via website and take a page out of the Elkhart Truth or something like that?
We certainly could do that. Now, I would say, I remember I used to do stuff like this, and an employee who's no longer here was fantastic. Sometimes got worried about privacy issues. That is not my area of expertise. I think we're fine with the numbers that we're talking about here, and the names associated.
Are these embargoed for any time, do we know?
And that's another thing, I don't know that they're embargoed, but I don't know that they're not embargoed right now either. So I would double check that. So Dr. Flyer, you know me pretty well.
So what are they gonna do to us if they're embargoed anyhow?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I was, you know, doing research, and there are schools that are touting this on their results on Twitter, you know, private schools in New Hampshire or whatever, and these results are just good. Some prep schools in Delaware, they're outstanding. They really are.
I mean, if we get in trouble, we'll just say, I'm sorry.
Well, I'm gonna let that be your responsibility.
Yeah.
I will pass these off to you. Frankly, everybody in the audience, that's why I didn't hand any more out. I'm not 100% sure. So now, I give them to you to do what you think is best.
I would just like to say, you know, thank you for sharing these with us. You know, having kids in the not so long ago distant past, take AP classes and the tests, these are not easy. And to be able to score a 3, 4, or 5 is pretty hard. But when you have a success rate in like this, that you don't see success rates like this very often. And so that is something that needs to be celebrated. And I know we've talked about how we market ourselves and things that we tout. You know, when people see scores like this and the kinds of classes that our kids have the opportunity to take and have success like this, that's what people need to see and learn and hear about, so they understand that there's a lot going on in buildings that people may not know, and we need to do a much better job of celebrating our successes. Because this is really, really good. And everybody involved in this needs to be commended for the work that they put in.
We're grateful to you to share this at the end of the meeting, and that wonderful sense of hope and excitement and accomplishment, and, you know, it is really, truly what Elkhart is capable of.
There's a lot of really good stuff going on. We'll take care of your 7th grade grandson and Matt. All I can really promise is take care of
See, and then that's our bean counter back there, know that your cup should be half full all the time.
Actually, that's not quite correct. We
drink from the saucer because our cup runs over.
Oh,
There you go.
I'm not.
What? You're not there yet?
I'm not going there.
You're doing something wrong.
No.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're gonna appreciate it. I always clear.
Dr. Schoenheimer, do you have anything?
I just wanted to offer my personal thanks to members of the instructional leadership team who worked to put all of this data and everything together to present over the last couple meetings, and then to have that contained in the plan that would be presented. And so, again, our goal is to outline for you the composite picture of all this data, to then be able to say, based on this data, or also provide you a little bit of background on some of the things that we've done already to address curricular and academic concerns, but then also what we're doing this coming year, the things that will be happening across professional development, a very detailed plan. We just met with the guiding coalition that we have for the district, the building principals and district leaders, to talk about the plan for the year of what we're going to be doing relative to the professional learning communities process, essential standards, common formative assessments, all of things to move all that work forward. I would say that we would all concur that it was a very productive meeting the other day, and there's lots of affirmation and positivity about that plan. So we're excited to share that with you, and then have reflected in that plan our district mission vision, our commitments as a district, and the goals that we have, and some specific student metrics indicated in there as well.
Anything from the board?
If I'm not mistaken, I think next time, we're gonna be talking about Title IX. Would that be correct?
Yeah.
And, I have no, particular, you don't need to come up, but, there's some changes about adding the word harassment in there and stuff like that, which I'm fine with. But what my going forward concern is that, Title IX started out as a very, and still is a noble program. That is great. But my concern of it is that our government is throwing a lot of catch-all things into this program and stuff like that, and it's gonna evolve itself and probably devolve itself into something that we won't recognize at some point in the future. And I wanna put that on everybody's radar, that we need to be sensitive to that and respond to it accordingly when we see it. So, that's all I have. Thank you.
Anything else from the board? Anything else from the board? Meeting adjourned.
Yeah.
Were you casting?
We will have to stand out.
Is that your fishing gesture?
No.